You probably know the story, right? A paralyzed man waiting for 38 long years by a pool, just hoping for a miracle. And then Jesus shows up, and with a single command, his entire life is changed. It's a fantastic story of healing. But what if I told you the details we all think we know, the angel, the stirring water, are actually hiding a much more epic confrontation, one that's been buried for centuries?
Yeah, the popular version, the one we all heard, is about an angel who comes down and stirs the water, and the first person in gets healed. But as we're about to see, the evidence from archaeology, from the biblical text itself, and from the early church, well, it paints a very different and honestly a way more dramatic picture of what was really going on that day.
I mean, you can just feel the desperation in his words, can't you? For nearly 4 decades, his entire life has been fixated on this mad scramble into the water. It's a brutal system where the weakest, the most desperate, are almost guaranteed to lose every single time. And that really makes you stop and think. A system that's based on luck, on competition, on survival of the fittest, does that really sound like the God of compassion? It just feels wrong. And that feeling, that theological tension, that's our first clue that we might be missing a huge piece of the puzzle here. Okay, so let's start digging for clues. And our first piece of evidence, it doesn't come from a library or an old book. It comes from the ground itself, from the field of archaeology. For centuries, pretty much everyone just assumed the Pool of Bethesda was a Jewish ritual bath, a mikveh, tied to the nearby temple. But modern archaeology has completely blown that idea out of the water. Excavations have revealed that the Pool of Bethesda was actually a Greco-Roman site. It was a pagan healing shrine. It was what's known as an Asclepion. That was a healing center dedicated to Asclepius, the Greco-Roman god of medicine. And these things were everywhere, super popular. There were over 400 of them across the Roman Empire. Think of it as the ancient world's version of a hospital and a temple all rolled into one. And the evidence for this is just overwhelming. Archaeologists have dug up ruins of a Roman temple right there over the pools. They've found all these votive offerings, little carvings of ears and legs and other body parts that people would leave behind as a prayer for healing. And get this, that stirring of the water, it was probably just a bit of stage magic by the priests using a hidden valve. And everywhere you find snake imagery, the symbol of Asclepius, which, fun fact, is why we still see a snake on a staff as a symbol for medicine today. So the setting isn't Jewish, it's pagan. That is a massive shift in understanding. Now, our second clue isn't buried in the dirt. It's hiding in plain sight, right in the pages of the Bible. It's the strange case of a missing verse. Now, if you grew up reading something like the King James Version, you'll definitely remember verse 4. It's the one that explains the angel coming down and stirring the water. But if you pick up a modern Bible, like the ESV or the NIV, you'll notice something really weird. It's just gone. The text goes straight from verse 3 to verse 5. So, what happened? Well, the reason it's gone is actually simple, but it's also incredibly profound. Textual scholars discovered that the verse about the angel just isn't in our oldest and most reliable Greek manuscripts. We're talking about the earliest copies of the Gospel of John that we have. It's not there. So the big takeaway here is that this verse was almost certainly not part of what John originally wrote. The leading theory is that it started out as a little note in the margin. Some later scribe was probably trying to make sense of this local superstition about stirred water and added an explanation. It was basically a way to sanitize the pagan story, swap out the god Asclepius for a more acceptable angel of the Lord. Okay, so this brings us to our third line of evidence, and that's the testimony of the very first Christians. How did they look at these pagan gods and all their supposed miracles? They did not see them as harmless myths, I can tell you that. They saw them as demonic counterfeits. Writing way back around 1680 AD, a church father named Justin Martyr saw the whole cult of Asclepius as a direct, diabolical knockoff of what Christ did. He basically said the devil was just trying to create a cheap imitation of the real thing. And he wasn't the only one. This was a really common view. Another church leader, Tertullian, argued that the devil is always trying to rival the things of God, even using something as pure as water, which is so important for Christian baptism, to lead people to ruin in these pagan rituals. For them, a real spiritual war was happening right in front of them. So when you put all these clues together, the pagan shrine, the missing verse, the early church's perspective, the whole story just transforms. This isn't about a pathetic race to get into the water anymore. This is a showdown. It's a showdown between the one true kingdom of God and a demonic counterfeit power. And even the number of years, 38, is so significant. This number is a direct echo of the 38 years Israel was punished in the wilderness for their disbelief. The author, John, is signaling to us that this man's paralysis isn't just physical, no. It's a deep spiritual paralysis that comes from looking for hope in all the wrong places. So where was his hope? It was in the water. It was in the pagan ritual for Asclepius. He was a Jewish man who had apparently given up on the God of Israel and was now placing all his trust in an idolatrous, competitive, and, let's face it, a completely powerless system. And then Jesus arrives on the scene, and you have to notice his method. He totally bypasses the entire system. He doesn't say a word about the water. He doesn't acknowledge the superstition at all. He just ignores the whole demonic counterfeit. His method is something else entirely. It's simply the word. He speaks a sovereign, gracious, and immediate command. There's no lottery, no competition, no ritual, just the raw, creative power of God speaking life into a broken body. This is a direct challenge to the authority of Asclepius, right on his own turf. So, when we put all the pieces back together, what's the real story here? What's the ultimate takeaway when we see this not as just a nice healing story, but as a full-blown spiritual showdown? Here's the real story in a nutshell. The healing took place at a pagan shrine to the Greek god of medicine. The angel story was added centuries later to kind of sanitize that pagan context. The man wasn't just physically sick, he was spiritually paralyzed by his idolatry. And Jesus' healing, it wasn't just some random act of kindness. It was a direct declaration of war, showing that the world's empty promises are absolutely no match for the true sovereign power of Christ. And that leaves us with one last big question. The story forces us to look in the mirror and ask, when we are hurting, when we are desperate for healing or for help, where do we look? What are the false hopes, the counterfeit systems, the powerless pools that we put our trust in, instead of turning to the direct, powerful word of the one true healer?